my name is Gloria and welcome back to another video. I'm so excited for this one. I love to read nonfiction and I'm so excited to participate in this year's Nonfiction November for the first time. If you don't know, Nonfiction November is an initiative to read more nonfiction and it is hosted by Olive from a book Olive. And the only thing you need to do is read one nonfiction book in November to participate, but she does have a few prompts if you want to challenge yourself to try to complete in the month of November. So this video will be my Nonfiction November recommendations. So these are going to be all books that I have read before that would work for these prompts. I plan to do a whole nother video, a follow-up to this one about the nonfiction books that I want to read for Nonfiction November this year, but this is my recommendations for what you could pick up if you're looking for books for those prompts. Without further ado, let's jump into it. These are the 4 words that could be interpreted in whatever way works for you. So collection, industry, style, and treatment. I'll start with collection. So the first book that I'll recommend is a collection of poetry, and that is All Along You Were Blooming by Harper Nichols. She's quite popular on Instagram. I think that's where she got started and then she published this book. But this is a lovely little book. It isn't explicitly religious, but she is a Christian author, and so there are some themes of grace and faith and love, but they could kind of be applied for anyone. There's just a lot in here about having grace for yourself, sitting in moments of pain and working through them, and it's about growth and love. It was very nice to read, and I'm glad I own this book because I feel like I could just pick it up whenever and kind of shuffle through, have something that kind of fits for me in that moment. And it is also very beautiful. It has very pretty illustrations and pages in here that kind of fit different themes. She makes all of this artwork herself, and it has that like illustrated, drawn, kind of scribbled effect. I really enjoyed this one. Another book for collection is The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11 by Garrett and Graff. I read this book recently in September, so you can hear more of my detailed thoughts in my September wrap-up. This is a fantastic audiobook as well as a physical book. I paired the two, and it is a collection of interviews from the survivors and people that were impacted in 9/11, and it is very hard to read and listen to, but so good and so important. And I think this is an incredible book that kind of takes the entirety of 9/11 and breaks it down almost like minute by minute, kind of everything that happened in New York City, in DC, and what was going on with the president and the military and all different perspectives. It was a very fascinating read, and I would highly recommend if you are all interested in learning more about 9/11. And another one that's a little out there for collection, but again, you can interpret it however you want. I'm gonna pick a cookbook to recommend, and that is 6 Seasons by Joshua McFadden. This is a fantastic cookbook that's very much about eating seasonally and particularly highlighting vegetables. There are some dishes in here about meat, but I would say the majority are about highlighting a very specific vegetable that's in season. And you might think, there's only 4 seasons, but this book breaks it down by spring, early summer, midsummer, late summer, fall, and winter. I thoroughly enjoy this book. The photographs are amazing. The recipes are great. I haven't made all of them, but I've had a few successes, and I found the most perfect and incredible kale salad that you will ever eat in your life is in this book. And the next word is industry. Again, can be interpreted in many ways, and this was by far the most easy kind of word that I feel like a lot of books can fit into because there is a nonfiction book about everything. So the first recommendation I have is American Kingpin, The Epic Hunt for the Criminal Mastermind Behind the Silk Road by Bilton. This is a very underrated nonfiction book. I read this several years ago. Way back when I used to watch Casey Neistat's daily vlogs on a regular basis. He recommended this book in one of his videos and I read it. I listened to it as an audiobook, and it was really my first exposure to narrative nonfiction, and I was so engrossed. This is a true crime kind of book, so very captivated, very invested of what's going on and what's happening. It is so well told though. It's very interesting. This book is about Ross Ulbricht, who was a 20-something-year-old guy who created the Silk Road, which is this basically Amazon of the dark web where people were able to trade drugs and guns, all kinds of crazy stuff. He created this like free market in the dark web, which I don't really even understand the dark web, but this book gave a lot of insight into that world. It was very fascinating. I'm actually probably due for a reread because I don't remember a lot of details, but I just remember the reading experience was excellent. Another recommendation for industry is The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company by Robert Iger. Forewarning for this book, it is very much a business this book for leaders. I am not that person and I still enjoy my reading experiences. I think if you are at all interested in business and Walt Disney, this would be a good read for you. So it is about that like big studio industry, what it's like working for Walt Disney, Pixar, ABC, CNN. Kind of talks about all of that. Mainly it chronicles his career and how he progressed in the industry and moved up the ladder to become CEO of Walt Disney, and talked a lot about different mergers and acquisitions and his relationship with Steve Jobs and Apple and Pixar. I really enjoyed it, but again, take it with a grain of salt. If you're not into books about business, then maybe skip this one, but I still found it pretty fascinating. The next recommendation is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Doughty. This book is a look into the death and funeral, burial, and cremation industry. It is very fascinating. The author is very witty and funny and clever in her writing, and she just shares anecdotes of her time working for the crematory, and it was very fascinating to like look behind the scenes of how all of that works, because honestly I feel like that is not something that is talked about. She also has a very popular YouTube channel, so you might have heard or seen her before, but this book was really interesting and would be a great read. Another one for industry is My Life in France by Julia Child. This, of course, chronicles Julia Child's life. This book inspired the book and then the movie Julie and Julia, which is one of my favorites. It's very sweet. I loved learning about Julia Child and her experience as a chef and kind of how she really paved the way for a lot of women and changed the culinary industry. She wrote the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and then it became a television program which was very successful. And this book is of course about her learning to cook, working in that field, but it's also about her travels, her relationship with her husband and different friends, and she's just a really incredible, cool lady. So it was very interesting to learn about her life. And finally for industry, I would recommend Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. Now this book, I will give you all of the warnings, is not a light read. This book is probably the book that made me the most physically uncomfortable I have ever gotten while reading a book. Made me very like ugh, to listen to descriptions of animal cruelty and animal treatment, just the way that our meat and slaughterhouse industry works in America, mainly looking at poultry, pork, and beef. It's really like a look behind the curtain of that industry and what goes on. I think it is very secretive and kind of closed off for a reason. This book sort of feels a little, you know, like conspiracy theories, but it's not. He's not really like making up information. I think he's giving it to you, and it's not like forcing it down your throat either. It's the whole goal isn't like be vegan and that's it. It's more like here's all the information, sit with it and, you know, do what you will and kind of let it influence your life. But it is a hard book to read, but I think also quite important. If you're looking to learn about the meat and slaughterhouse industry, this one would be the one, but it's a tough one. Now the next word is treatment, and I have two books that work for both treatment and for industry, so I'll include those two kind of in between. The first one being Hidden Valley Road: Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. This book is a deep dive into the world of schizophrenia and how this disease was kind of discovered and understood and how treatments have become made available throughout the years. This book follows the Gallen family, and 6 out of the 12 children were diagnosed schizophrenic, and this book is taking a look at that family as a case study for schizophrenia. The timeline for this book and how the disease kind of progressed and exposed itself in this family follows post-World War II, so 1940 up until the 1970s, and then following to present day, it talks about kind of where that family is now. But a lot of like the DNA that was tested on these particular individuals was very important for research in the schizophrenia and mental health field. Very interesting to learn about, also very sad of how this family was impacted, and particularly the individuals that weren't schizophrenic and the females that were affected by their very abusive brothers. The next one that works for both treatment and industry is The Radium Girls: The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. I read this book last year and it will make your blood boil. Like, it made me so angry to learn about this part of history that I just had no idea happened, and particularly how these women were treated. So treatment and industry. If you don't know, this book is about how hundreds of women in the early 1920s worked for radium dial companies, but they would basically use this paint that had radium in it to paint dials on watches, like the faces of a watch, to make them glow or glow in the dark or shine. And basically people didn't know that radium had any poison in it and that radium poisoning existed. So radium was an element that was discovered by Marie Curie and was super profound for x-rays, and it like took the world by storm, and people were digesting it, and there was all these like health remedies for it and all of this stuff that people thought this was this miracle drug. In actuality, it's poison. And really the story is like a cornerstone foundation of what became known as radium poisoning, and then it influenced the industry and how people now work with radiation and how they have to protect themselves. But mainly this is about these girls, these young girls that were working in these factories, and they were ingesting paint in very incremental amounts, but it did cause super deterioration to their bodies. So it started with a woman losing her teeth, and then her bones would hurt, and then there would be cancer. Basically all of these women from different places would start getting these super intense health problems, and no one would listen to them. So doctors, lawyers, the factory owners and bosses, even their own families, like a lot of people did not believe these women. And that is the part that will just blow your mind, of how they just wanted to like shut them up and cover it up. And it's a crazy story. It's very good. Highly recommend. And then I have 2 recommendations for the word treatment specifically. The first one being Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. I read this book in February and absolutely loved it. This book follows Bryan Stevenson, who is a lawyer, and he worked with death row inmates in the late 1980s. And this book mainly follows the case of Walter McMillan, who was a black man in Alabama wrongfully accused of murder and put on death row. So it follows that trial and that case, and also other work and other cases that Bryan Stevenson was involved in, particularly with juveniles in the system and getting them out of the prison system. This book, like The Radium Girls, will make you so angry of like the injustice of the world and our justice system. It is also very tough, but so important, and I loved reading this book. And this works for treatment because I think it's like how we treat other people, particularly the treatment of prisoners and people in death row and black prisoners who are mistreated and a lot are wrongfully convicted. The next recommendation for treatment is Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. This is a very fascinating book about our caste system in America, particularly with the roots of slavery in America, but it also takes a look at how Hitler kind of formed his foundational caste system based off of slavery in the US for his look on the Aryan race and all the people who were less than human in his eyes. And this book also looks at the caste system in India. This book is very good at uncovering kind of like the foundations of why we are where we are today with our racial injustice and how everything has kind of unfolded to this point and why that tension still exists and is still very prevalent to this day. This author did an incredible job unpacking those historical moments and also sharing anecdotes from her personal experience with encountering racism and sexism. It was very good and talks a lot about how we treat individuals. So I think this one works well for this prompt. All right, and then the last word is style. This one was by far the hardest one for me to fit words to because I don't read a lot of books about fashion, and I don't really read that many books about like home decor and style of your home or anything like that. But I have a few, and some of them may be, you know, stretches, but I think they work. The first one I'll mention is The Faithful Spy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Plot to Kill Hitler by John Hendricks. Now, I think this book works for style because it is a graphic novel, and so I think the art style of how it was written and created is beautiful. So I think this one is excellent. It's also very short, and it's technically like a middle grade young adult graphic novel, so it's easy to read if you're trying to pack in a lot of nonfiction books for November. It is about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German theologian during the war, and he basically had a moment of crisis within him where he was like, do I hide away and not do anything, or do I try to get involved and kind of take this man down who is Hitler? He did end up getting involved and was then later imprisoned, but this book is a fascinating look into his life and his faith. But I think this book also does an incredible job of laying out how Hitler came to power and what was happening in Germany economically, politically during that time, and how the Nazi regime really came to power. So I think for a younger reader, this book is incredible, but also for an adult, like it was really good to dive into that and learn, because, you know, I don't really remember what I learned about World War II in like history class way back when. So I thoroughly loved this one. It was fantastic. Another recommendation for style I think will work is Zero Waste Home, The Ultimate Guide to Simplifying Your Life by Reducing Your Waste. This book is all about the zero waste lifestyle, so I think it works. This is a deep dive into what zero waste living is all about. If you're at all interested in that, I would recommend picking up this book, but I will warn you that this book is a very deep dive and it's very granular, and the author is like an ultimate zero waste person, so it really is kind of like jumping off the deep end. And a lot of these things in this book aren't even feasible for me, who I am like tiptoeing and interested in that lifestyle, but it is really cool to learn about how this woman and her family did it. And there were still some really good takeaways and kind of tips and tricks and ways to change your home and change your life to become more efficient and free of waste and excess. But yeah, I would recommend for people who are maybe already interested in that kind of thing. And then finally for style, I will throw a Christian a nonfiction recommendation at you, and that is How to Pray, A Simple Guide for Normal People by Pete Craig. I think this works for style because this book talks about the different styles of prayer and like the different types of praying you can do, and it breaks them down in a really accessible and practical way. If you're at all interested in some practical application and ways that you could enhance your prayer life or start praying or what prayer is all about, this would be the book for you. So those are all of my Nonfiction November recommendation for the 4 prompts for this year in 2021. I will be doing a follow-up video for the books that I plan on reading for the month of November for these prompts. If you have any recommendations for me for Nonfiction November for these prompts, leave them in the comments down below because those could make their way into my next video. I'm always looking for more recommendations for nonfiction. If you've read any of these or have any recommendations or any other comments, leave them down below. I love responding to your guys' comments and having a conversation down there. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. I will see you guys with another video soon. Bye!